Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Middle East Forum's speaker webinar series and podcasts. My name is Winfield Myers. I'm the director of Campus Watch, and today we're going to discuss the reaction in Israeli universities and among Israeli academics to the Middle East Studies Association's, or MESA's, recent adoption of BDS as its official policy. And our guest today is ideally suited to do that. He is Eyal Zisser. Welcome, Eyal. We're very happy to have you today.
Good evening. I'm very happy to be with you.
Very, very happy to have you. He's ideal because he is both an important scholar in Israel and a university administrator. He is the Yona and Dinah Ettinger Chair in Contemporary History of the Middle East and Vice Rector at Tel Aviv University, where he previously served as Dean of the Faculty of the Humanities and Director of the Moshe Dayan Center. He's the author of many books. I won't try to list them all now, and earned all three of his academic degrees, BA, MA, and PhD at Tel Aviv University. Our format today will be 15 minutes of discussion of our topic, followed by audience Q&A. If you have a question, and we hope you do, please use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen to type your question. Please make them brief and to the point, and I'll get to as many of them as we possibly can. Well, Eyal, last month, MESA voted to, by a 4-to-1 margin, to adopt BDS as its official policy. There's been reaction here in America to that. Negative reaction among supporters of Israel and among supporters of academic freedom. But obviously, Israeli scholars and universities are the hardest hit by this, those that are in the fire of MESA's anger and politics. What has been the reaction there among both university administrators, professors, students, and others?
Well, once again, good evening. Actually, it's not a very good evening here in Israel after the terrible terrorist attack of yesterday, in which two students of Tel Aviv University were killed in a bar in a restaurant in Tel Aviv. And I guess MESA will condemn the Israeli security forces for killing the terrorists, the so-called,
Yes, I'm sorry. I didn't realize that about the Tel Aviv.
But this has to do with our topic. Mm-hmm. Well, I'll tell you what. When MESA was founded 60 years ago, it was for many Israelis sort of a gate to the big world. I mean, we were totally isolated. Most countries of the world didn't have even diplomatic relations with Israel. The Arab world was closed in front of us. So the only way to get in touch, to speak with Arab colleagues, to get introduced to the academic world was through such associations, which were, not very friendly, but this was what I would call the British understatement, anti-Semitism or anti-Israeliness. I mean, hostile and still exclusive. But when we come to our days, it's the irony of history that the Arab world is being open in front of us. Mm. I mean, Israelis can travel, can conduct research in most Arab countries. In many of the Arab countries, we are welcome as scholars. And it's not only, the Middle East, I mean, India, China, the entire world. So when I think of whether I should go to attend the conference in Washington, the MESA conference, or attend the conference I was invited to in Oman, in Abu Dhabi, even in Qatar, in Morocco, the answer is quite clear. And also, because of the dramatic achievement of the Israeli Academy as a vice provost of Tel Aviv University, every week there is another delegation from a leading American or European university, Ivy League universities that come and want to establish not only a dialogue, but cooperation, joint program with us, Northwestern, Columbia, New York University. So, you know what? I mean, MESA lost its importance, especially when it turned to be not a group of scholars, but a group of activists. And we do know who are these activists, what they are after. And for us, it's not as important as it was before, although I do acknowledge that, you know, it's a struggle and we shouldn't give up, even if it looks to us as not as important as it used to be in the past.
You mentioned the universities approaching you to establish scholarship programs or exchange programs or academic programs of some sort. And those that you mentioned, among them Columbia, are of course members of MESA. They can't have it both ways, can they?
That's the question of what should we do? I mean, if the president of Columbia, the president of Northwestern, presidents of many American universities come to us and say, well, you know, what can we do about those people? You know, freedom of speech. I'm afraid to say that even in my university in Tel Aviv, there are some, you know, professors who think that, you know, in the name of, you know, freedom of speech, they say they can't do anything to those professors at their university, but they do promise us that as an institution. And I think that this is, by the way, when you look at MESA, around 3,000 members, less than 30% bother to participate. I mean, this happens with, you know, Israel has this socialist tradition of, you know, Histadrut and all these groups when, you know, a bunch of small group of activists take control. The majority, the silent majority, do not care or do not interfere, and they do whatever they want, but they do not really represent the field and most of the scholars. I do know we have a problem with humanities and social sciences, not only because they are declining, but because when you look at the so-called opposition to Israel, it's mainly in these fields by the emerging, viable, and leading field of research and excellence. In other areas, well, there is no problem at all.
It's true here too, of course, in universities. A small vocal group can take over and bully and ostracize others, particularly in positions of administrative importance, which they obviously are not at Tel Aviv or where you wouldn't be among the administrators. What has been the reaction among your colleagues, whatever their field of study? Have you spoken to some of your colleagues about what they think about this when an American organization attempts to ostracize in this way?
Well, you know, I used to go to MESA conferences with many of my friends, and I noticed that less and less Israelis, but not only Israelis, scholars from even the United States do not come anymore to those conferences. There are so many new organizations, ASMIA and other, but also many other places where you can exchange views and ideas and where you can present your research. I think that the sense is they were always very hostile. Now they don't want us. We don't. They need us more than we need them. And by the way, it's my sense that it's not only Israel that they are targeting. Of course, they are against any Arab regime in the region, but basically like the Iranians who speak about the great devil and the little one, they are anti-Americans in their sense. I mean, those activists, we know who are they. Many of them are people who came from the Arab world, and they have a problem of identity. The only thing they can agree upon and unite. The only common denominator is, the hate to Israel. Let us not make a mistake. It's not about, Israeli presence in the West Bank or Judea, Samaria. It's about the existence of Israel. If you study the BDS and the decision taken by MESA, the only way Israel can get legitimacy is by, allowing the refugees from 84 to come back. This is at least in the resolution, and this means, the annihilation of Israel. So basically, that's the reality.
Yeah, it is. It is. Has there been any talk that you have heard about an institutional or a formal response in some way to this motion?
Well, first of all, even in my university, most people didn't hear about MESA and do not think that this is an important association, or the president of university, who is often talking with presidents of universities in the United States, hear from them that, you should ignore them entirely. The Israeli Association of Oriental Studies sent a letter of condemnation. There is the Association of Israel Studies, which we are a full member, that actually left MESA. And we still consider what else should be done about it. But academically, as far as Israel is concerned, I don't think that this resolution has a real impact.
Interesting. That's interesting. MESA isn't what it used to be, and we could say an organization that used to be academic, as you said, now certainly more a political activist organization than an academic one, has shot itself in the foot in some ways. It's made a move that will decrease its importance even more than had already been done by its previous constitution, by the people who are members of it, who come to the annual conferences, and who run it, most importantly, who are in charge of it, and who are in control of what happens there. That's to me, that's the takeaway so far. That the reaction of Israeli academe is, I would go too far, I was supposed to say a shoulder shrug, but it's at least not panic. There is no sense of alarm, it seems. Am I correct in that?
Yes, absolutely right, because we are so fully sure of ourselves. I mean, in the sense that we really don't need MESA. Yeah. I mean, we have direct contact with all American universities, with the president, with the provost, with the departments. We have excellent relations with most of the scholars. Yes, not every scholar, especially the activists, but with most of the scholars. We have excellent working relations with institutions all over the world. So
if an individual scholar still wants to come to the US and go to use archives, or go to a university to a conference, not necessarily a MESA conference, but just a conference being put on by an academic unit of university, you anticipate no issues with that at this point?
Certainly, clearly not an issue. And let me remind you that, Blessing movement was the establishment of Israeli studies everywhere in the States. And some centers for Israeli studies were taken hostage but most of these centers, most of these professors who teach Israel studies are very openly, and universities in large want to encourage Israeli studies everywhere. So once again, I don't see any problem with the MESA resolution.
That's fascinating. Well, since that is true, let me ask you about it from the perspective of Americans. You've spent time here, you've lived here before, and what about an American graduate student, say, who's coming up through Middle East studies, who wishes to study Israel, study in the archives there, go to Israel, exchange student, maybe as an undergraduate even. Do you see that having an effect on their ability to advance in their profession? From your end, and also just looking at it from as best you can, an American perspective too.
Yeah, well, I do think that it has an importance, because clearly any young scholar who teaches Middle Eastern studies or history knows that unless he expresses clear anti-Israeli views, he might not be accepted or admitted by the professor in a certain department. This is unfortunately the situation. Mm-hmm. On the one hand, we see, very positive signs. Many states in the United States already issue laws and regulations or condemn the BDS movement. At the same time, it's hard for me to say whether this discourse will poison the young generation, of scholars. By the way, it didn't happen in Europe. Europe, the situation in Europe, well, not organized BDS, but in many places, London, England, Europe, there were, those anti-Israeli attitudes, this anti-Israeli discourse. Nowadays, relations between Israel and Europe, and relations between Israel and many of those academic institutions are excellent. So I don't think that such views will poison the mind of young people. I do hope that this will not be the case. After all, let me repeat what my colleague and my professor Martin Kremer said already. Rashid Khalidi said in a conference, we heard him, both of us heard him, why nobody listened to us? It was in the early 2001 or 2002, when everybody there in MESA tried to understand, the reasons for the 9/11 attacks, and to show sympathy to the attackers, and to say that we should understand and contain. And he said, Martin, nobody listened to you because you are simply anti-Americans. And that's, I think, what every American who listened to them after attacking Israel, also attacking America, does understand it.
They're vitriolically anti-American and anti-Israel. We cover them all the time here. Not that they don't enjoy the benefits from living here, and not that they wouldn't, have a conniption if you tried to cut their salaries or in any way lower their living standards. But it's they always want it both ways. We have a few questions from our audience. Let me encourage you, please. There's plenty of room to ask if you have some. Stephen Orlow asks, are there any competing organizations which current members of MESA can be encouraged to join in lieu of MESA membership?
Well, first of all, in the United States, there is a SMIA, and
the Association for the Study of the Middle East and Africa. Yes. Yes,
founded by Fuad Ajami after, he decided that enough is enough with MESA, and Fuad Ajami was a great historian, and I do attend their meetings, and every year the number of those who attend it is increasing. There is the Association of Israel Studies that cover the entire region. And apart from that, first of all, in the United States, there are those associations that deal with history and with international relations, and there are other organizations outside the United States. For example, I was offered, I can't do it, but you know, there is some European, the Nordic Association for Middle Eastern Studies. Unfortunately, they will hold their conference in Iceland in Rosh Hashanah, so I wouldn't be able to attend it, but I was offered to. I got an invitation. So there are many other places where, you know, Israelis can come and present their ideas. We are very much American oriented but the world is, you know, much bigger than, you know, MESA and what it stands for.
Yeah. Michael Perloff says, what prevents these scholars from looking at the evidence and realizing that the conflict involving Israel revolves, I'm going to abbreviate his question here, is principally imperialistic Islamic reclamation jihad. Israel's primary declared genocidal adversaries are the Islamic resistance movements founded in Gaza and on and on. Their primary supporter is Islamic Iran, he says, the party of Hezbollah and so on, other Islamist terrorist groups and Islamist groups.
Yeah, but let me say, don't interfere or disturb, you know, MESA people with these facts and with history details. They are not after those things. They are after, you know, they are activists and after their idea. They have an idea and then they direct their discourse and research and toward it. So, you know, it's useless engaging in any discussion with them. But once again, you know, I attended many of the MESA conferences, and most people, most 99% of the people who attended these meetings were, well, you know, they came because this is the professional association, but you know, they were friendly and had no problem with you know, on the contrary, were very interested in coming to Israel and to listen to us and to exchange views. So, yeah.
Sure. Yeah, which is heartening to have. But let me ask a question coming off of that. If you look at the number of papers, a lot of the topics that are discussed at MESA's annual conferences, many of them do not involve Israel and the West Bank and Gaza. A lot of them involve everything from ancient Persian poetry to medieval Ottoman history and on and on. There are a lot of, in other words, topics there that have academic substance. And then there are, of course, those that are overly political and overtly political, I should say, and are aimed at more at politics than in any sense scholarly. In your academic career, do you know of any academic organizations that have been flipped, so to speak, that in which a coterie of activists who have taken them over have been displaced either gradually or in a coup d'etat of some sort by people who want to return an organization to its roots, to its scholarly roots of rigorous scholarship in lieu of this kind of politicized activism?
Well, I'm not sure. I don't have an answer. I didn't look into it, but clearly it's either that MESA will come to its sense eventually. Although, you know, even if an agreement will be reached between Israel and the Palestinians, and even if Abu Mazen would sign the agreement, it will not be acceptable, of course, by the MESA people who consider him as a traitor, you know. But what I see is a gradual decline of MESA as, you know, a place where people from all around the world can meet. That's what I see. In many cases, what I see is not an organization redefine its goals and in many of the cases, what I witnessed was the decline of a certain organization and the emergence of a new one.
Sure. Yeah, it was sort of withering away of the organization seems more likely, certainly than a reformation or a renewal of it. Mindy Stein asks, is there any way to get university administrators to insist on the hiring of more balanced Middle East studies professors?
Well, first of all, what university administration should do is to stop supporting MESA. You know, MESA is financed by a nation of the members pay, but also there is the institutional membership, and many American universities provide financial support to this organization. You know, many Middle Eastern institutions all around the United States pay their dues to the MESA and thus support this organization. This should be stopped. I think that this should be stopped. As for a more balance, you know, there is this question of academic freedom. I guess no administration, no university president will dare to, and I do understand it. What the effort was during the last 2 decades was to establish Israeli study centers to balance, to provide the campus, the students, a more balanced view of the developments in Israel and in the region. And this is a very positive approach that should be encouraged.
Yes, yes. We've seen some of those come out to be, as you say, truly offering balance. Some will hire equally politicized professors who are Israelis and say, see, we've balanced it now. This person's an Israeli, he's got to be on our side. But I agree, you've seen a lot of growth in that, and there's an obvious reason why. Let me ask you this. Do you think that, or do you fear that the politicization of a professional organization like MESA, and we've seen that in other professional organizations as well, the MLA here in America or the American Historical Association, other academic groups that may not have voted for BDS, but they are unquestionably politicized. Do you fear that that politicization will discourage people from entering the field, whether it's just as undergraduate majors or as professors? And do you fear, therefore, that the field itself, the study of the Middle East, the study of Israel and other areas, will be adversely affected by that?
Well, first of all, I have to say that it's already became a total failure. It's corrupted. I mean, if you look at Bernard Lewis and Fuad Ajami, they are not anymore scholars like these two giants, because, you know, everybody that wants to study or to conduct a research on a country or a region to provide the reader with a general view, the history of Egypt will immediately be accused as being, you know, pro-Israeli, pro-Sisi, pro-American. So instead, people, and I see it, it's very clear, tend to focus on, you know, unimportant, insignificant, negligible areas and fields of study that really do not give you the general picture. And we feel nowadays the lack of, you know, such giants, like, as I mentioned before, Fuad or late Fuad and late Bernard. So there is a problem with Middle Eastern studies nowadays. And I do think that when people realize that they don't get to know the Middle East through courses and through the current program, they will go other place to find for answers, to look for answers.
Curiosity will be satisfied and pursued in some way, whether in established university setting or elsewhere. I hope and think that's right. I think you're correct. Well, unfortunately, we've come to the bottom of the hour. Our guest has been Eyal Zisser. Again, thank you so much for being with us. We really appreciate it. This has been a very enlightening discussion We hear what has happened here in the U.S., but we rarely hear the Israeli side of this kind of dilemma. And what you've said is truly enlightening. We're going to be speaking about this, I think, for some time. Thank you, too, for everyone who has tuned in. We appreciate it very much. And please watch your mailbox this weekend for further announcements of forthcoming webinars and podcasts. Again, thank you to our guests. Thank you to all of you. And have a wonderful weekend. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Good night from Tel Aviv.
Yes, good night.